For the first time in my guitar playing life, I have the opportunity to play gigs this year. You see, a few months ago, I joined a cover band, and we're looking at playing a few gigs later this summer, and it got me thinking about my pedalboard and how I might need to build a new one. Because for the first time ever, I had to ask myself the question, what pedals do I need? Now, if you saw a video I made several months back, I've actually made a pedal board last summer from scratch, which I love and it's fantastic, but really the pedals on that board were just a collection of the pedals that my guitar heroes use, and it wasn't really put together with any sort of purpose. They're great pedals and they get great sounds, but I sort of fell for the marketing of, they sound great using it, I need that pedal to sound great, instead of just practicing more. So that was the board I built last summer. I'm actually extremely proud of how it came out, but as I was taking it to and from rehearsal, I realized a lot of the pedals on that board weren't actually being used. I only kicked on one or two, and the rest just kind of sat there. It really got me thinking about that question I mentioned just a moment ago of what pedals do you need? And that's sort of a loaded question because it's subjective, right? My needs are going to be different to your needs and to someone else's needs. And we really have to ask ourselves a series of other questions. So how did I go from this board I built from scratch last summer to this much smaller new board? How did I make the decisions for what ended up on here? And what questions did I have to ask myself? The first question I ended up asking myself is pretty broad. What application are these pedals being used for? You see, before I was just using these pedals on a board at home, so it didn't really matter how big the board was, what pedals were on it, because I can really easily just grab things off the shelf and plug new things in, and it didn't really matter. But now I actually have to travel to and from rehearsals, gigs, and home, so I want to make sure that everything that I'm bringing is actually being used. So the weight and size is more important because I'm literally having to lug all this stuff around, and I don't know how big the gigs are going to be, or like how much space I'm going to have, so I don't want to be rude and take up more than what I'm actually using. The next question I asked myself was, what amp will I be using for these gigs? And it's important to know that because some amps have reverb, some don't. Some will have tremolo. A few have different channels with different amounts of gain on it. And by knowing which amplifier you're going to be using, you can know whether or not you're going to need to bring a reverb pedal or a tremolo pedal, depending on sounds that you need for your gig or rehearsal or what have you. I sort of alluded to this next one earlier, but we want to make sure that everything we bring is actually serving a purpose. I had a really cool harmonic tremolo pedal and a crazy delay pedal on the board, but I never kicked it on during rehearsal because I didn't need any of those sounds, at least for our current set list, so those came off the board. So it's really important to consider things like that. Are you actually going to use it for the songs or for the set list that you're going to be playing? Or is it just sort of filling up space? The final thing that I had to consider when building this board was practicality, right? I have a fantastic amplifier here at home. It's the Echorec Studio Pro 35. It's a head in a cabinet. A great amplifier, great sounds. It would serve everything perfectly for the gig, but it's not very practical. It's a much bigger size than a combo amp that I'm going to be using. And it takes up more space, and it's also difficult to get to and from. So it's not a very practical choice. And the same thing applies for pedals. You might have a pedal that's the perfect choice for your set list, for the sounds that you need, but maybe it's too big for your board, and it forces you to lose a different option or bring a much bigger board in order to accommodate something like this. So something really important to consider is, does it meet everything you need, and is it still practical? That was a run through of the different questions I had to ask myself while building this new board. I'm very excited to be playing gigs this year, and I'm sure that the choices on this board will change. We are guitar players after all. We love gear and shiny things, so I'm sure things will change on the board throughout the rest of the year. But this is a great way to make sure that I am bringing in pedals that I'm actually going to use, that they're filling a need, and they're not just there for the sake of filling up space. If you found any value in this video, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. It really helps me out, and thank you for watching.